Well, welcome back everyone, and this is the third in the series of videos explaining my shot, steel and stone, horse and musket rules. And obviously a bit of time has elapsed since I recorded the first one, and I just wanted to say a huge thank you to everyone who's come and watched the videos and has left comments, likes, that kind of thing. It really makes a difference to helping get some visibility, so thank you very much indeed for that. Anyway, you will recall at the end of the last video where the forces of Prunkland in white over here had made their move. We'd gone through the command phase and we'd explained that they were in a bit of a pickle because of the two columns, and we had some not particularly brilliant dice rolling going on, but what we've managed to do is the von Eintopf regiment has moved forward slightly, but the back half of the regiment, the rearmost companies, have had to march outwards towards the flank in order to then deploy into line abreast with their fellows. Meanwhile, Regiment von Renscher again has advanced slightly with its rear companies moving up. The artillery battery, which is von Kettenraucher, the gun over there, has moved forward very slightly and unlimbered, but it didn't have enough move left to be able to also fire in that turn. It was unlimbering right at the end of the turn. And we also had, of course, the von Chorber Jäger, who you will see sneaking through the woods at the back there. In case you can't see them because they're too well camouflaged, there we go. That's where they are. Okay, so they've snuck forward through the woods, obviously because they're in skirmish order, Jäger, unimpeded by the trees and other terrain, but of course they can't go into the pond. Why would they want to? Get their powder wet, because the ponds themselves are impassable terrain. And what that means is that this is the situation for the front line. Behind them, the cavalry, the von Klinkertor Cuirassiera, of course, have moved up from the flank because I decided to put a couple of little hills in the way. They've had to clamber over a hill so as not to get tangled up with their infantry. Now, that is difficult terrain. They've had to move over there at half speed, so they haven't got terribly far. And you will notice in the rules that I've got a series of rules called disruption, and disruption can have an effect on the fighting ability and the movement ability of troops, and their cohesion, certainly should they ever get into melee. So technically, whilst they're passing over that terrain, von Klinkertor are suffering a disruption point. Now it's up to you. You could make a note on a piece of paper. You could use a little dice of some kind. And what have we got here? We've got some, what have I got? A little red dice here, for example. I did have some white. Oh, here's some white dice. Let's use a white dice just with a 1 on it. Or you could use a tiddlywink or counter and just put that behind, right? And that just indicates that they're suffering the disruption point. Now, you could say, well, the likelihood of that having any effect at the moment, Henry, is negligible. And you'd be right. And some people I know say, I can't be bothered with disruption. It's up to you. I know you're war gamers, and whatever my rules say in the book, you're going to tweak them anyway, so it's up to you. But I like to keep track of disruption. In order to clear that disruption point, they'll just need to sit still for a move. Okay? You can normally clear, I think it's 2 disruption points per move, just by remaining motionless and having a rest. Otherwise, they'll carry that disruption point with them potentially. And what that indicates is literally just in an age where keeping your formation was critical to you know, your ability to deliver well-aimed volleys, to your ability to impact at full strength in a melee. Forget Hollywood cavalry charges. I think we all had a laugh at the film Napoleon recently, where it was just like, okay, sound the charge and everyone just goes pell-mell, right? That's not how it was done. Cavalry were carefully trained to build up from walk to trot to canter to the final charge speed, so that they would all hit in one mass. That was the whole point of it. So disruption obviously would inhibit their ability to do that. So that's just a little note. That's over on von Klinkertor. But it's time now to turn our attention to Borgan Mark, the Borg, okay, who have been sitting there very patiently waiting to see what the Puntlanders are up to. Now, you'll also remember that I mentioned in the last video about the potential for troops to march at a faster speed so long as they're outside 12 base widths of the enemy. That's 72 centimeters. Now, of course, what's happened is the Jaeger over there have snuck closer, quite a lot closer to the enemy. And let's see who that might affect. So I'm going to come around the side here and put the tape measure down for 12 base widths. And that's 12 base widths. And what that means is those Jaeger, oh, they're certainly within 12 base widths now of the Ostergotland infantry. Actually, the cavalry, oh yes, they're just within range of those as well. But, he said, lifting the dangers of tape measures, ladies and gentlemen, which is why I like sticks. He said lifting up a forest and putting it back again. But of course, that doesn't affect the Västergotland infantry, who are in column behind. So potentially they could get a movement bonus. And that also applies, of course, to these Jaeger, probably. I don't think they're within 12 base widths of Van Eintopf. So no, they could potentially have a bit of a bonus as well. Okay, so let's have a look. We're back at the leadership phase. So we rolled for initiative, if you remember, at the beginning of the turn, and Puntland was successful, so took the initiative and had its move. Now it's Borgan Mark's move, but what we do still need to do is to test for the commanders. Borgan Mark gets black dice. If we turn on the camera over here, which I hope you've been finding useful, by the way, it's the dear old venerable iPad has been brought out of retirement for the purposes of recording dice rolls, and so far not done such a bad job, has it? Okay, so let's tune in to the dice, what do we call these things, a dice rolling pad thing, and let's see who is going to go first. So okay, remember, we don't want to necessarily use the Commander-in-Chief, his leadership to begin with, because if he screws up, then the whole army's in trouble. So we'll default to doing the infantry commander first, and that is Generalleutnant für Infanteriet Pietro Afnori. Okay, and let's see, he's a competent commander, remember, so he needs 8 or less, and let's see what he rolls. He rolls 6. So he's actually passed by 2 or more. And that means, as an infantry commander, that his troops would get an additional base width of movement. Okay, so it's on your leadership table there. Remember that if he passes by 2 or more, then he can add 2 base widths to mounted troops and 1 base width to other troops. That's voluntary. Now also remember that the Västergotland infantry, who are still outside 12 base widths, they're not in column of march, they're in a column of attack there. That's what Charles Grant dictated. And so they could add 50% to their normal movement. Okay, And so close order infantry, their normal march distance is 3 base widths, and they are in a column of attack which automatically adds another base width, so that makes 4. And he's just added another base width because of his command role. That gives them potentially 5 base widths of movement, and because of the distance they are away, they could add 50% to that, so 7.5 base widths, which is, that's quite a long move, but there we are, they've decided they want to get a move on. However, we're not going to move them first because obviously their comrades in the Ostergotland regiment, in line there, are in the way. So the first thing that our brigadier here wants to do is he's going to order the Ostergotland to move forward, and then he's going to bring the Westergotland around and head, I think they should head for the field enclosure and see if they can get there first, because that's quite a hefty chunk of movement they've got there. Obviously, we're going to bear in mind that that's potentially going to obscure the field of fire of the howitzer here. But there we go. What else do we want to do? You know, he's not in charge of them, but quite clearly the Jaeger here just want to get a move on, head up the flank to start irritating the Prunklanders from the flank here. So they're just going to head up the flank here. Meanwhile, the cavalry commander now, he needs to do his role. And our cavalry commander, again, he's just competent. And so he is Generalleutnant für Kavalleriet, Anton af Kulpi. I hope I'm not ruining a Swedish accent here. So let's roll for him. So 8 or less. Here we are on the, let's have a look. Let's have a look. Yes, we're going to roll here on the dice tray. That's the word I'm looking for. Oh, he's rolled a 6 and a 3. Well, that's a fail. It's not a terrible fail, but it is a fail. And you will see on your leadership table that a normal fail deducts 2 base width from movement of all his mounted units, and he is only in command of mounted units. If he was in command of infantry, that would deduct 1 base width. This is where I'll point out, okay, he's failed. If I wanted to, I could think, well, maybe the commander-in-chief could step in and do better than that. But again, he might fail. He's got a factor of 9 rather than 8, so that gives him a slightly better chance. That would have been a pass in his case. But man, wouldn't we look silly if he steps in and he fails as well? That would just be a bit of a nightmare. And to be honest, because of the situation, I don't think it's going to hurt too much that he's having to deduct a couple of base widths from the cavalry, because obviously there's the infantry in the way, there's the enclosure over there, he can't actually see very much to attack over on that flank. So for the time being, I think it's fine that they'll just follow on behind, keep in reserve, and that will mean as close order heavy cavalry, their move distance will be reduced from 5 to 3 base widths. Okay, there's nothing else happening at the moment. There's no charges being declared. No one's going to fire yet until later on. So what I'm going to do is I'll move the troops and we'll speed up the video so you don't have to be bored with this whilst I'm just moving the troops. And then I'll come back in live, as it were, once I've done that, and we can have a look at anything that's perhaps in firing range and perhaps have a bit of a shot. Right then, I'll crack on. Okay, this is how far the Borg have got, and of course what I'm going to allow is for the general, so long as he's got a bit of a brain in his head, and this is where the D&D things come on, because the general should notice that the howitzer is going to have its field of fire blocked. And so I want him to issue an order to the howitzer, because it's not horse artillery, so it would require an order. I want him to issue an order to the howitzer for it to limber up and potentially then to move. And I think you can see that it's going to get pretty crowded on this side of the battlefield. So I think I want the general to order the howitzer to get on the road and potentially then deploy later between these two regiments or even on the other flank. Now, let's have a look at what his factors are, shall we? The General für Särskilde Militäre Expeditionen is Thomas af Hini. Okay, potentially some kind of Irish heritage in there. Who could say? Some sort of Celtic heritage. Anyway, his intelligence is 56. It's not enormous. 56 and an initiative of 42. Incredibly healthy. 94. It's going to be hard to kill him off. But let's go round the back here, okay, and see if he can roll a 56 or less on these dice to think of that idea. And he's rolled a 3 and a 0, which makes 30, which means yes, indeed, he's passed. So my general is, because his command radius, remember, he's got a huge command radius of up to 10 base widths. And well, I've lost my piece of string. I can't find my piece of string, ladies and gentlemen. But 10 base widths, I can show you on the tape measure. 10 base widths is a long way, 60 centimetres. So he's well within the command radius. So one of his aides has galloped over and issued an order to the howitzer to limber up and get going. Okay, so the difference it makes is for a complex manoeuvre, okay, is going to be to reduce by 3 base widths. And so what he'll have to do is just spend the whole move limbering up, okay. But there we are, they've limbered up and they'll be ready to get going next move. There we go. Let's have a chap at the front to lead the horse. So that's limbered up and it'll be ready to move next turn. So what that means is for the Borg, they have nothing that's within shooting range that could fire at this point. Here, you remember, I've got my nice little sticks as range measures. That's musketry range. And these are armed with muskets as well. So even the Jaeger, not quite. It's getting close, isn't it? But that's the end of the Borg move. And that completes a turn. Okay? Now, this is where you as players have an option. You could say, well, okay, we're just going to do I go, you go, I go, you go. And because Prunkland started and won the initiative in this first turn, then when turn 2 starts, we're just going to continue Prunkland, Borgenmark, okay? And so on throughout the game. But you have a choice. It's up to you, folks. If you prefer, you can say, well, that was the first turn, but the winds of change might happen, so potentially you could roll again for initiative at the beginning of each turn. It might then be an opportunity for Borgenmark to have another go, as opposed to Prunkland. And just for fun, shall we do that? Okay, so I'm going to get a red die for Prunkland and a black die for Borgenmark, and let's roll for initiative for turn 2 and see what happens. Here goes. It's 3-all. Wow. So I'm going to have to roll again, folks. Are you ready? And 6-1 to the Borg. Well, Okay, let's play it that way. For turn 2, it's going to be Borgan Mark again. So tune in for the next video very soon.